I wasn't going to mention this, but you may as well. I'm just going to give the breakdown from Wikipedia because it's as true and as factual as anything else we know about this bizarre case, so that later when folks watch this video, years down the road, they can see what we were talking about. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was a scheduled passenger flight from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Beijing, China. On Saturday, March 8th, 2014, the 777 disappeared with 227 passengers of 15 nationalities, plus 12 crew members on board, following its last contact with air traffic control less than an hour after takeoff, which has been now recently reported the last words from the pilot were allegedly, "All right, good night." A joint search and rescue effort covering an area of 27,000 square miles or 70,000 kilometers in the Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea, conducted by at least 12 countries. The search area continues to expand, and searchers begin to even look for evidence on land. 2 passengers who boarded the aircraft using stolen passports initially raised concerns of a terror plot. Malaysian police identified both passengers and said they were unlikely to be terrorists. Communication between official representatives of many organizations and the public regarding the loss of the flight has been imprecise, incomplete, and sometimes inaccurate, and there are doubts concerning the aircraft's possible location and trajectory. On March 12th, that was now yesterday as you're watching this, Wednesday, Chinese authorities announced that one of their satellites had observed large floating debris at sea northeast of Kuala Lumpur and on the intended flight track. James, the most recent bit of breaking news in this obviously developing now 6 days on story, now they're wondering if the plane flew for at least 4 hours after no contact. So the theories go wild, and this is perfect fodder for endless speculation. Was it terror? Was it air? Did a meteor hit it? I couldn't help but think when they showed these suspects' photos, they look like the Tsarnaev brothers from the Boston bombing from last year. The pilot has let people into the cockpit for fun before. The phones are still allegedly ringing. And thanks to our man on Twitter at GJ Salisbury, we'll give you the guide to the missing Malaysia airline plane conspiracy theories. James?
Well, it is just a bizarre mystery at this point, and we really don't have a lot of facts to go on, but there are at least a couple of points that I find interesting in this. One is the fact that this is being used as an opportunity to comment negatively on the government in Malaysia, and and now there's all sorts of questions being raised about what the government knew and what information they were and weren't sharing and when they shared it, etc., etc. So that's interesting in and of itself, because the demonization of the Malaysian government is part of I think a larger strategy that also involves, of course, the smearing of the former Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who invited people like myself out a couple of years ago to talk about 9/11 truth. So that's obviously something that is a touchy point geopolitically in all of this. But the other interesting point is just that one of the speculations, one of the things that, I mean, we don't know anything, so we can't really say, but one speculation that's been bandied about has been related to a very interesting FAA release in the Federal Register from last November to do with specifically the type of the model of Boeing that was in question here, the 777-200. From federalregister.gov, quote, the integrated network configurations in the Boeing model 777-200, 300, and 300ER series airplanes may enable increased connectivity with external network sources and will have more interconnected networks and systems such as passenger entertainment and information services than previous airplane models. The existing regulations and guidance material did not anticipate these types of system architectures. Furthermore, 14 CFR regulations and current system safety assessment policy and techniques do not address potential security vulnerabilities which could be exploited by unauthorized access to airplane networks and servers. End quote. Long story short, some people are speculating, does this mean Boeing knew about a vulnerability that would allow this precise model of airplane to be taken over remotely? Does this play into what happened and why this plane was apparently wildly off course in the last time it was known? And that, of course, brings up, at the very least, it brings up the specters of the possibility of the remote-controlled airplanes on 9/11, which I've talked to 9/11 researcher Aidan Monahan about a couple of times on the Corbett Report, so people can look into the archives for that. And also brings up the question of people like Dov Zakheim, who, before he became the Undersecretary Secretary of Defense in Rumsfeld's Pentagon and the comptroller who oversaw the missing trillions. He was working at a company called SPC, Systems Planning Corporation, Inc., a subsidiary of System Planning Corporation, which did, among other things, provide software for controlling drones and also destroying them in military exercises. And Zakheim also oversaw a system that saw 767s being transferred to Air Force bases as part of a Boeing Pentagon deal. So again, all of this leads into a vast network of interesting connections to the 9/11 and what happened there. So I'll throw some of those notes into the show notes. And again, all we have at this point is speculation. So I don't think we have a lot to go on at this point other than what we have laid out so far.
Well, and I'm glad you got into 9/11 because that's, in a way, exactly what it brings up. I find it really fascinating on just an esoteric level that as the days went on, of course, more and more theories started to pop out. We had more time to think of them. I swear in the last 24 hours, people started to fixate on the idea of what if this plane comes back as a weapon? What if they've repurposed it? And just as I feel like that was in the zeitgeist, 2 buildings blow up in Manhattan, which is bizarre coincidence. And we also see, like we mentioned last week in the Osama trial of the nephew and the shoe bombers, we also now have the CIA feud with the Senate panel, putting the post-9/11 lack of accountability back in the spotlight. So again, it's kind of reminding everyone of the never-ending specter of 9/11. So James, hopefully there will be some answers to this story, and hopefully very soon. Now, having said that, we'll move to our second story this week, which is a fascinating one and a long story. And as always, we'll always implore you to go check out these stories yourself. We're giving you the breakdown that you can digest it. We want you to go read these stories fully for yourself. Fascinating story via the New York Times and posted to my own foodworldorder.com. After a big bet, hedge fund pulls the levers of power, staking $1 billion that Herbalife will fail and then lobbying to bring it down. At a midtown Manhattan steakhouse last June, William A. Ackman, the activist hedge fund manager who had bet $1 billion on the collapse of a nutritional supplement company, Herbalife, offered his latest evidence to a handful of other hedge fund managers about why the company's stock could soon plummet. He told his companions that Representative Sanchez, Democrat out of California, had sent a letter to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, calling for an investigation of Herbalife. The commission had not yet stamped the letter as received, nor had it been made public, but Mr. Ackman, who had personally lobbied Sanchez and stood to profit if the company's stock dropped as a result of the call for an inquiry, already knew what it said and read the letter to his buddies from his cell phone. When the office ultimately released it, they backdated it to the day before dude was telling all his bankster buddies about it. The letter was a small hint of Mr. Ackman's extraordinary attempt to leverage the corridors of power in Washington, state capitals, and city halls for his hedge fund's profit after taking $1 billion financial position called a short, a bet that will pay off only if Herbalife's stock drops. Corporate money is forever finding new ways to influence government, but Mr. Ackman's campaign to take this fight to the end of the earth, using every weapon in the arsenal that Washington offers in an attempt to bring ruin to one company, is a novel one, fusing the financial markets with the political system. Others have criticized the business practices of Herbalife, a company that sells vitamins and other health supplements through independent distributors, many of whom are lower-income Latinos or African Americans. But Mr. Ackman's attack is unprecedented in its scale, and Herbalife officials strongly deny his accusations that the company is a pyramid scheme that stays afloat by constantly recruiting new distributors. In closing, James, and again, it's a long, fascinating story. To pressure state and federal regulators to investigate Herbalife, an act that alone would cause the stock to dive, his team has helped organize protests, news conferences, and letter-writing campaigns in California, Nevada, Connecticut, New York, and Illinois, although several of the people who signed the letters to state and federal officials say they don't remember sending them. This all according to a New York Times investigation. James, this is really a fascinating story which still connects to the specter of 9/11 with shorts.
That's exactly what I was going to say. In fact, just as you were reading that, it really occurred to me that this is just another form of that, what we've seen before. And again, for people who don't know about the put options on 9/11, there's a lot of work that I've done on that in the past, so I hope you'll look into it. But yes, the ability to bet on a company going down gives all sorts of, not only opportunities, but incentives for people with a lot of money and power to make that company go down. And that can be done in a very spectacular fashion, as on 9/11, or in just an insidious fashion, like what we're seeing with Herbalife. And I'm glad you found this story, because this one, I didn't see this one at all when it came out in the newswires. And to me, this is absolutely the heart of the core of the corruption of the fascist state, and exactly why it must be opposed vociferously, why it is so insidious, this corporate government nexus. Because again, if the rich and powerful people in positions to bet billions of dollars on this or that company going down can then spend billions of dollars to make it happen in order to make even more billions of dollars, where does that leave the average person with the average mom and pop type business operation? It obviously means that the money will continue to accrue in fewer and fewer hands of the connected insiders and their cronies. And that's exactly what is happening. The wealth inequality continues to raise in America, which and all around the world, but specifically, I think most obviously in America. And it's precisely because of this corporate governmental fascistic nexus. And that's why we have to argue as strenuously and as often as possible and as loudly as possible for the separation of business and state at the very least. And of course, I would argue for the elimination of the state altogether, but at any rate, the separation of business and state. And on that note, people might want to check into my recent interview with Ryan Dawson about that, the ebook that he's penned, The Separation of Business and State, which is, I think, really the core of the problem that we're dealing with, and be brilliantly exposed by just a story like this, where there isn't even anything so untoward going on. It's just the usual kind of crony conspiracy that we often see, but it really does. It can completely level companies and completely make people's fortunes based solely on their connections to the inside the Beltway.
James, let's now quickly move to our third and final story this week for the celebrity update you've all been waiting for. Between Two Ferns boosts traffic to Obamacare website. President Barack Obama, Barry Soetoro, and his decision to appear on comedian actor Zach Galifianakis' web series Between Two Ferns, drawing fire, of course, from conservatives. But it might be just what the doctor ordered for the American Health Care Act, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Less than 3 weeks before the 2014 registration window for coverage under Obamacare closes, and the decision to shoot the video is stark evidence of the Obama administration's willingness to pull out all the stops in order to lift the percentage of young adults who've signed up for health care insurance under the law. James, I find this is another kind of fascinating move from the sort of campaigner-in-chief, the only presidential candidate who actually had maybe a specific logo and was sold Madison Avenue style. I think an interesting connection to this, James, folks probably missed it, but there was an author who just passed away this last week named Joe McGinnis. He wrote a book called The Selling of the President in 1968 when an ad man told him that he was leaving to go work for Hubert Humphrey's campaign back in 1968. And this guy was like, oh, really? Presidential campaigns have advertisers? And they do, and they did, and he kind of wrote the story. So I find The Selling of the President continues on, James.
It certainly does, and it's, look, I don't say this as a humorless person. I like Zach Galifianakis' stand-up. I find it hilarious, and there are some of the Between Two Ferns in that series, I think they're quite funny. But this one, honestly, I didn't laugh at. Honestly, it made me throw up in my mouth a little bit, as much as they tried to make light of the situation and everything. But the coy little joke about, no one wants to look at your text messages in the U.S. government, Zach, kind of joke about NSA spying and all of this, just really rankled me in the wrong way. It rustled my jimmies, as the youngins say on the internet. And again, I mean... Again, I wish the state didn't exist. I don't believe in presidents and the reification of these individuals who are no better than you or me. But even having said that,